The land known today as Israel and Palestine has stood at the crossroads of history for more than 3 millennia, sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. It has been the stage for kingdoms, conquests, and spiritual traditions that shaped the world. But it has also been the center of one of the most enduring struggles for territory and identity in human history. For over 3,000 years, Jerusalem and the surrounding lands have been claimed, lost, and reclaimed by countless rulers, from the ancient Israelites and Babylonians to the Romans, Crusaders, Ottomans, and modern powers. Each era left behind not only monuments and ruins, but also stories of faith, survival, and conflict. Today, the Israel-Palestine conflict continues to draw global attention. But to understand why this struggle has lasted so long, we must trace its history through the empires that rose and fell, the faiths that took root, and the peoples who have called this land home. The earliest traditions linking the land of Palestine to the Israelites trace back more than 3,000 years. According to the Hebrew Bible, after the Exodus from Egypt, the Israelites, under the leadership of figures like Moses and later Joshua, sought to enter and settle in this territory. While the historical details are debated among scholars, these accounts became central to Jewish identity and their connection to the land. Centuries later, around the 10th century BCE, the Kingdom of Israel emerged under King David, who is said to have captured Jerusalem and established it as his capital. His son, Solomon, is traditionally credited with building the first temple, a significant religious site for the Jewish people. However, this period of stability did not last. In the 6th century BCE, the Babylonian Empire, under King Nebuchadnezzar II, conquered Jerusalem. The city was destroyed, the first temple burned, and much of the Jewish population exiled to Babylon. This event became one of the defining traumas of Jewish history. Roughly 70 years later, the Persian king Cyrus the Great allowed many Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple, ushering in what historians call the Second Temple period. For about 400 years, the Jewish people maintained religious life in Jerusalem, though often under the influence or control of larger empires. By the 1st century CE, the Roman Empire had taken control of the region. Tensions between Roman rulers and the Jewish population led to a series of revolts. The most devastating came in 70 CE, when Roman forces destroyed the Second Temple. In the following centuries, Jews were dispersed widely across the Roman Empire and beyond, a scattering that would shape Jewish identity for generations. For the next several centuries, Jerusalem remained under Roman and later Byzantine control, with Christianity rising to prominence within the empire. This shift turned the city into a center of Christian pilgrimage and worship, adding another layer of sacred meaning to the land. In the 7th century CE, the rise of Islam brought a new era to the region. Following the rapid expansion of the early Islamic caliphates, Muslim armies captured Jerusalem from the Byzantine Empire in 638 CE. Under Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, the city was incorporated into the expanding Islamic world. For Muslims, Jerusalem became the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, linked to the Prophet Muhammad's night journey, making it the third holiest city in Islam after Mecca and Medina. For Christians and Jews already present in the city, this period marked a significant transition. Historical accounts suggest that, unlike some earlier conquests, the city was integrated into Islamic rule without widespread destruction, and its diverse communities continued to practice their faiths, though under Islamic governance. For several centuries, Jerusalem remained under various Muslim dynasties, including the Umayyads, Abbasids, and later the Fatimids. During these years, the city was both a center of worship and scholarship, drawing pilgrims from across the Islamic world. However, stability was disrupted in the late 11th century with the arrival of the Crusaders. European Christian armies, responding to calls from the Pope, captured Jerusalem in 1099. Contemporary chronicles describe brutal violence during the conquest, with both Muslims and Jews in the city facing massacres. The Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem, ruling for nearly a century. In 1187, the Muslim general Saladin retook the city after the Battle of Hattin. Unlike the earlier Crusader conquest, records note that Saladin allowed many Christian inhabitants to remain and restored access for Muslim and Jewish worshippers. Under his leadership, Jerusalem was re-established as part of the Islamic world, setting the stage for centuries of alternating control between Muslim dynasties and European crusading efforts. By the 16th century, Jerusalem and Palestine had become part of the Ottoman Empire, where they remained for roughly 400 years. Under Ottoman rule, the city saw both periods of neglect and moments of revival, serving as a religious hub for Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. By the early 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had established control over Jerusalem and the surrounding territories, ushering in an era that would last for nearly 4 centuries. Under Ottoman rule, Jerusalem remained a city of profound religious importance, visited by Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. While the city never became a major political or economic hub, it retained immense spiritual significance. During the 19th century, the empire weakened, and European powers began to exert increasing influence in the Middle East. Jewish communities, many of whom had been living in diaspora for centuries, started returning to Palestine in growing numbers. Motivated by both religious ties and the rise of the Zionist movement in Europe, these immigrants sought to establish a homeland in the land of their ancestors. At the same time, the local Arab population, predominantly Muslim but also including Christians, had long-standing ties to the land and viewed the new arrivals with concern. Tensions slowly began to grow between the two communities, setting the stage for future conflict. World War I dramatically reshaped the region. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed, British forces captured Jerusalem in 1917. That same year, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, stating its support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, while also promising that the rights of existing non-Jewish communities would be protected. The British Mandate for Palestine, formalized in 1920 by the League of Nations, placed the region under British administration. Over the next 2 decades, Jewish immigration increased, particularly in the 1930s, as Jews fled persecution in Europe, including the rise of Nazi Germany. The influx of new settlers heightened tensions with the Arab population, leading to protests, strikes, and violent clashes. By the 1940s, the conflict had become deeply entrenched. Jews sought to build a safe homeland, while Palestinian Arabs resisted what they saw as the loss of their land and way of life. Britain, caught in the middle, struggled to manage the growing unrest. By the mid-20th century, the situation in Palestine had become increasingly volatile. The horrors of the Holocaust intensified the urgency of establishing a secure homeland for Jews, while Palestinian Arabs feared the permanent loss of their own land and identity. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan. Palestine would be divided into 2 independent states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem placed under international administration due to its religious significance. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, seeing it as a chance to finally establish a recognized state. The Arab leadership, however, rejected it, arguing that it was unjust to give a large portion of the land to a minority population. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The following day, neighboring Arab states, including Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, launched an invasion. The conflict that followed became known as the First Arab-Israeli War. By the time armistices were signed in 1949, Israel had expanded its territory beyond what the UN plan had allotted. Jordan took control of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, while Egypt administered the Gaza Strip. For Palestinians, the war was a catastrophe, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe, as more than 700,000 people were displaced or fled, many never to return. The years following Israel's creation were marked by ongoing hostilities and repeated wars that reshaped the region. In 1956, the Suez Crisis erupted when Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. Israel, alongside Britain and France, launched a military campaign against Egypt. While Israel withdrew under US and Soviet pressure, the war further heightened regional tensions. The most significant turning point came in 1967 during the Six-Day War. After rising tensions with Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, Israel launched a preemptive strike. In just 6 days, Israel captured the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. This not only tripled Israel's territory, but also placed millions of Palestinians under Israeli control. The war profoundly altered the conflict. Israel now governed areas that Palestinians considered vital for their future state, while Jewish religious and nationalists saw East Jerusalem, including the Old City and Western Wall, as a historic and spiritual triumph. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War erupted when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel during the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Although Israel eventually repelled the attacks and secured a military advantage, the war underscored the vulnerability of the region and led to new peace efforts. In the aftermath, Israel began establishing settlements in the occupied territories, a move that remains one of the most contentious issues today. For Palestinians, the occupation symbolized the loss of their homeland and freedom. By the end of the 1970s, the conflict had solidified into a long-term struggle, shaping the identities and politics of both peoples and leaving peace as elusive as ever. By the 1980s, decades of occupation and failed negotiations had created deep frustration among Palestinians. This frustration exploded in 1987 with the outbreak of the First Intifada, a popular uprising across the West Bank and Gaza. It was characterized by protests, boycotts, and clashes with Israeli forces. The Intifada lasted until the early 1990s, resulting in thousands of casualties and drawing global attention to the Palestinian cause. In 1993, a breakthrough came with the Oslo Accords, negotiated between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO. The accords created the Palestinian Authority and granted limited self-rule in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. Both sides recognized each other officially for the first time, raising hopes of a lasting peace. However, disagreements over settlements, refugees, and the status of Jerusalem soon stalled progress. The late 1990s brought further efforts, including the Camp David Summit of 2000, but the talks ended without agreement. That same year, the failure of negotiations and rising tensions sparked the Second Intifada. Far more violent than the first, it saw suicide bombings, military incursions, and widespread bloodshed on both sides. Trust between Israelis and Palestinians collapsed. During this period, a new political force emerged, Hamas, rooted in the Muslim Brotherhood, which opposed Israel's existence and rejected the Oslo framework. In 2006, Hamas won Palestinian legislative elections. The following year, after violent clashes with the rival Fatah faction, Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip, while Fatah retained control of the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. This division has persisted, complicating efforts for unified Palestinian leadership. By the early 2000s, the dream of a two-state solution appeared increasingly uncertain. Checkpoints, barriers, and settlements in the West Bank deepened divisions, while rocket attacks and blockades turned Gaza into one of the world's most troubled regions. Despite multiple attempts at negotiation, the conflict entered the 21st century without resolution. The new century brought with it both moments of hope and recurring cycles of violence. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew its settlers and military from the Gaza Strip, raising hopes that peace might follow. However, the years that followed saw escalating tensions. With Hamas in control of Gaza and Israel imposing blockades citing security concerns, the region quickly became a flashpoint. Between 2008 and 2021, several wars broke out between Israel and Hamas. Major conflicts occurred in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and 2021, each leaving widespread destruction in Gaza and casualties on both sides. Israeli cities came under rocket fire, while airstrikes devastated large parts of Gaza's infrastructure. Civilians often bore the heaviest burden, with each round of violence further eroding trust and prospects for peace. At the same time, settlement expansion in the West Bank continued, complicating the possibility of a two-state solution. Tensions often flared in Jerusalem, particularly around the Old City and holy sites, where access and sovereignty remained deeply contested. Yet there were also attempts at diplomacy. The Annapolis Conference in 2007 and subsequent negotiations sought to revive peace talks but failed to reach a final agreement. In 2020, the Abraham Accords marked a significant shift as Israel normalized relations with several Arab states, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. While hailed as a diplomatic breakthrough, the accords did not directly resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, leaving many Palestinians feeling sidelined. By the early 2020s, the conflict seemed locked in a repeating pattern: brief escalations of violence followed by fragile ceasefires, international calls for peace, and continuing disputes over land, sovereignty, and security. For many on both sides, the hope of a lasting solution seemed as distant as ever. In October 2023, the long-standing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians escalated into one of its deadliest phases in modern history. On October 7th, Hamas launched a large-scale surprise assault from Gaza into southern Israel. Armed militants crossed the border, carried out attacks that killed civilians and soldiers, and took hostages. The attack shocked Israel and the wider world, igniting a war whose consequences continue to unfold. Hamas stated that its operation, which it called Al-Aqsa Flood, was a response to years of Israeli policies, including the blockade of Gaza, ongoing military raids in the West Bank, expansion of settlements, and growing tensions around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. For its leaders, the attack was also intended to draw global attention back to the Palestinian cause, which many felt was being sidelined amid regional shifts and new alliances. Israel responded with a massive military campaign known as Operation Swords of Iron. Airstrikes and a ground invasion targeted Hamas strongholds and infrastructure, with leaders declaring the goal was to dismantle Hamas's military capabilities and secure the release of hostages. As the conflict escalated, the humanitarian toll mounted quickly. Gaza, already under years of blockade, experienced widespread destruction. Tens of thousands were killed, the majority civilians, and hundreds of thousands were displaced from their homes. Critical infrastructure such as hospitals, schools, and residential areas was heavily damaged, leaving many without access to basic needs. In Israel, civilians endured rocket fire, displacement, and the trauma of mass casualties and kidnappings from the initial assault. Families of hostages organized protests demanding urgent action, while many communities near Gaza faced devastation that would take years to recover from. Internationally, the war triggered widespread protests and debates. Governments and humanitarian groups called for ceasefires, while accusations of disproportionate force and war crimes were directed at both Hamas and Israel. Diplomatic efforts sought to halt the fighting, but each ceasefire proved fragile. By 2025, the conflict had left Gaza in ruins and Israeli society deeply scarred. Sporadic fighting continued despite international mediation. For both sides, the October 2023 war became a painful symbol of how entrenched the struggle had become, a reminder that peace remains as urgent and as elusive as ever. For more than 3,000 years, the land of Israel and Palestine has stood at the crossroads of civilizations, empires, and faiths. From the kingdoms of David and Solomon to the empires of Babylon, Rome, and the Ottomans. From crusaders and caliphs to modern nations and international powers, each has left its mark on Jerusalem and the surrounding lands. Yet through all these centuries, one theme has remained constant: the land's sacred meaning and the fierce contest over who belongs to it. For Jews, it is the ancestral homeland and the site of their most sacred traditions. For Palestinians, it is the land of their forefathers, where generations have lived, worked, and built communities. For Christians and Muslims around the world, Jerusalem remains a spiritual beacon. Today, the Israel-Palestine conflict continues into the 21st century without resolution. Efforts toward peace have risen and fallen. Wars have erupted and subsided, and international diplomacy has come and gone. Yet the fundamental questions, land, sovereignty, security, and identity, remain unanswered. What history shows us is that this conflict is not simply about borders or politics. It is about memory, faith, and the deep scars of displacement and war. Every generation inherits not only the land, but also the unresolved struggles of those before them. And so the story continues. The search for peace in this small strip of land, so revered, so contested, and so enduring, remains one of the greatest challenges of our time.